Merry Christmas. This is an episode specifically for those of you who should have better things to do than listen to a Christmas episode. But if you're driving to see family, this is a great time to listen to a T.REX podcast. Welcome back to another T.REX Talk episode. I have with me a guest that I've wanted to interview for a long time. Brian Evans, you have worked at T.REX for some time.
It's true. About 4.5 years.
About 4.5 years now. And you keep managing to escape from the podcast.
I have been successful up to this moment, yes.
This very moment. And I believe that not only are you doing the podcast with me, which makes me very happy, I believe you even have a topic that you wanted to talk about related to Christmas.
Well, you said we were going to talk about Christmas. So that's the topic, right?
Yeah. So there's a million different things that we could do to talk about Christmas. We try to be a Christian company. Our goal is to be a God-honoring company, which I think is a better way to say it than Christian company, because Christians are human
we can't
beings.
Baptize the company.
We can't baptize the company. Company is not written down in the book of life.
That's correct.
But we want our company to be a God-honoring company. And so what would you want to tell folks listening to this podcast about Christmas? Because there's no hold bars. We want to do this with every podcast episode. We want to do this every day of the week with the company. But this is special. There's something very important about this week.
Sure. And I think as we go through this season, I think there's a lot of opportunity to get distracted. Being in the retail business like we are, we can focus on Black Friday sales.
We did have some of those, yeah.
That's right. End of the year, finances, all of that.
Upcoming board meetings,
and all of that is important.
Oh, did you want to spend time with your family too?
If possible.
Yeah.
Yes. I'd love to have Christmas Day off, Mr. Scrooge, if possible.
And an extra hay penny for the next year, yeah.
That's right. And a little coal for the fire, since we're both wearing coats, so maybe it's cold in here.
Yeah. But what do you want to focus on? Like, it is, the distractions are many. The distractions are even more now. People are possibly even listening to this podcast instead of spending time with their families. What would you want them to focus on as they listen?
Well, with that setup, I would say I would ask them to turn off the podcast and focus on spending time with their family. But maybe even more importantly, focusing on what is the season that we're in.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of question around it. There's a lot of confusion. There is a lot of hustle and bustle. It has become very commercial, though in reality, I think it has had that for hundreds of years. Even Dickens is writing about it, way back in the day. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think since we are a media company as well as a retail company, there was an event that happened in 1965, which is before you were born.
It is, yeah.
And just slightly after I was born. But it is one of those events that at the time didn't seem like much, but has had lasting impact. And I think it is one of the most profound, if I can say it that way, presentations of what is Christmas about that we have available to us outside of scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
And
kind of overlooked.
Yeah,
in some ways.
Kind of overlooked, but in the way that, a family heirloom sitting on a shelf is overlooked. Everybody knows it's there.
Yeah.
Everybody knows what it is, and we sort of take it for granted. In 65, Charles Schulz, the creator of the Peanuts cartoon strip, was contacted about doing a Christmas special. And he was aware, since they explained to him that they were on very short notice. They had very few days to pull this together and to get it produced. And he agreed without hesitation. And my understanding is he had script and full concept together in a day. So this is one of those examples of being ready when opportunity comes.
Yeah.
And one of the things we talk about here at T.REX is leading boldly with our ideology. And Charles Schulz was a believer, and he saw the opportunity to do a Christmas special. And in 65, it was, as commercial as it is now, and he wanted to address that. And if you think about really the time frame, 65 was a very pivotal time in culture. We had just survived the British invasion with the Beatles, 1964.
I thought you were going to go back to like World War II, Korea, but yeah.
Oh, no. I mean, this is right in the thick of a major cultural shift.
Yeah.
1964, you have Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand as a huge hit. And just a few years later, Beatles had a hit with Let's Do It in the Road, if I can say that on the podcast.
You can say it on the podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
But I mean, that's where the culture shifted that fast. And Charles Schulz is right in the middle of that. And I think he was seeing those effects and really wanted to make a statement. So it's interesting because it's a really odd production. It has this quirky jazz soundtrack.
It is.
The animation,
a very strange time.
Yeah, the animation is not state of the art by any stretch.
No, but I would say, as an animator, I would say that there's a charm to it.
Yep.
And I'm really glad that they didn't have the time or the money for a lot of frills that wouldn't have fit the either the character design of the Peanuts comic strip or detract from the message. Like, I actually think that this is it's a sweet spot in a lot of ways. Yeah.
There's no adults in the strip. And I believe, if my memory is serving me correctly, it is the first animated show on television that did not use a laugh track.
Oh, that's interesting. That is something that makes it more timeless and classy, for sure.
It's kind of stark. I mean, when the set's quiet, it's quiet. There's no extra noise. So anyway, they rushed it through production, and they were doing the original screening for the crew that had worked on it. And most of them had thought, oh my, what have we done? This is terrible. But there was a prophet among them because they said, no, this is going to run for 100 years. Not quite yet, but it started in 65. It was pulled off national TV in 2019, I believe. So that's a pretty good run.
That's a good run, yeah.
Yep. And it only got pulled off because I think, if I remember, Apple bought the rights to it and pulled it off.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can still
watch it on Apple TV, on iTunes streaming, perhaps.
That's right. Prime Video, whatever. Yeah, it's still out there. Still holds up. It's still really well done.
Yeah. It's been a while since I've watched it all the way through. And in fact, because this is the busy time, I had planned to show it to my kids and get their reaction before this recording, but it didn't happen. So you'll just have to I predict they will love it.
Yeah, well, you have to show it to them before they hear this. But it's really interesting because Charles Schulz, I don't know that much about his background, but his theology and his worldview are solid. He actually takes on the despair that is present in a Christless Christian Christmas, a Christless Christmas. That's hard to say.
Yeah.
He takes on some of the ideology of the day. And he even pushes it to the point of presenting a worldview or a world without Christ. Mm-hmm. And it's despair, it's peer pressure, it's crass commercialization. It's pretty bleak. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Charlie Brown bears the weight of it. And the lovable blockhead finally goes through all, goes to everybody he can think of. He talks to Lucy, and she wants to quote all this scientific knowledge, and she has no wisdom, and she can't help. Her only real love is money. Though she does have one of the greatest quotes ever that she loves humanity. It's people she can't stand.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I think Bill Gates is the same way. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people, that's true. Yeah. But yeah, there's a fascinating thing. When I was a kid, I didn't love the Peanuts comic strip. Part of the reason for that is when I was a kid was when Bill Watterson had Calvin and Hobbes in full swing. And it is the greatest comic strip ever. And
Agreed.
it's phenomenal. And so I was comparing Peanuts to that. As an adult, I appreciate Peanuts more. Peanuts is more written for adults who are thinking about this stuff.
Yeah.
And seeing it through a child's eyes is a fascinating way to approach the material. And as an adult, I can see that. As a kid, I just wanted to watch Calvin ride his wagon down hills and fight snowmen and do cool stuff like that. Yeah. Now, interestingly, now that I am an adult and I have kids of my own, I still love the Calvin and Hobbes, and I identify with Calvin's parents a lot more. So there is a multi-generational depth to Bill Watterson's work too, but I have come to like Schultz quite a bit more.
Sure, and no Charles Schultz, you may not get Watterson, right?
Oh, so I think that's a huge thing.
Yeah, he was definitely standing on his shoulders, and I think he acknowledges that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. Well, Bill Watterson, I think, is too complimentary of some of the guys that came before. Like, he's like, oh, my strip will never rise to the level of like what Walt Kelly was doing. Is like, yeah, that was good, but you did Calvin and Hobbes. Yeah.
Right. And suddenly a Calvin and Hobbes podcast breaks out. We should do that next, maybe.
It's kind of hard not to. So Bill Watterson, tell me a little bit about Charles Schultz. I was fascinated by Calvin and Hobbes. I love Bill Watterson. He's also a guy whose theology is deeper than you might expect. Now, I don't know what it is exactly, because he is a famous recluse and hermit, and he doesn't talk about his stuff that often. Right. But when he does talk about it, it is with a huge amount of depth and finesse, and he's very well read and knowledgeable about all kinds of literature and art. And he was a political cartoonist before he did Calvin and Hobbes. His political cartoons are on point, as
I think he majored in political science, didn't he?
Yeah, so he's a sharp guy. But what do you know about Charles Schultz? Can you tell me a little bit more about him? Because he's a little more your time period.
Oh, thanks. No, he actually, I think Peanuts broke out in 59, which is before my time. I actually don't know that much about Charles Schultz other than just this little bit on the Christmas special, and I guess what I gleaned from him through the comic strips. I was a fan of the Peanuts comic strip, and I was a pretty faithful reader of it in a newspaper. Ask your mom and dad, kids, what a newspaper is.
Yeah, it was a little bit like clay tablets, only cheaper, and it came out a little more often. Yeah,
every day. Every day there's a new Peanuts strip. So yeah, I don't know that much, but just through the Christmas special, I have a real admiration for a guy who took an opportunity and pushed it about as far as you could in that media.
Yeah.
It's really, really pretty amazing. And the different worldviews he addresses in the strip, and then, presents the Christian worldview and that it is really the answer, is enough to have my respect just on that point.
And it's kind of a unique thing at that time. Like, not only is the cultural shift happening in terms of popular music and media, I'm trying to remember when the rural purge was. Do you remember the rural purge? I forget the exact time, but it was whenever, I'm trying to remember the names of the shows, but like Green Acres and Happy Days, like there were all these shows that were kind of they were kind of offshoots of cowboy shows. For a while there, TV in the 50s was like all cowboy shows. And then it was a whole bunch of rural kind of farm shows, because that's what America was like. And a thing happened very deliberately called the rural purge. And they got rid of shows that took place in towns, and they got replaced with shows that took place in LA and New York.
Oh.
Like extremely deliberately. And the Waltons, I think, were the only survivors of the purge. And part of the reason that the Waltons are a established, like, classic television show that lasted forever is because they were the only not apartment-based television show. All their competition got eradicated. But it was a super deliberate thing where it was like the advertisers and the TV networks wanted to push this different thing. And so it didn't matter that shows with farmers and lovable small-town deputies had good ratings. It just didn't matter. They just picked a different style of stuff for the television networks. It was just handed down to the folks. And so I forget the exact dates because that would be another thing to dig into. But yeah, this happens. Linus reading the Bible and saying this is the true meaning of Christmas happened in roughly this time frame. Just interesting.
Right, because people would tend to think, 65, it was still acceptable to read from the King James Bible on TV, and even, seeing Hark the Herald Angels Sing on national television. And it was as uncomfortable then as it is today. It's kind of shocking that it was that overtly Christian and in your face. Yeah. It's a great move. I was not aware of the purge, but I seem to think maybe that came home to roost here in early November. That the rural community rose up and said, "No, we're still here.
We're still here, and we vote Republican." Thank you very much. Yeah, no, it's kind of interesting, and I'm not aware of anything that happened that was quite that ham-handed or coordinated. There's been some stuff in the tech industry, like when Alex Jones was kicked off of every single platform on the same day.
Right.
That looks pretty coordinated. But the rural purge of television, it's hard to say, but that is a thing that people wrote about it. Like they just decided like, we're going to go after advertisers of higher dollar products, and they're aiming for upscale single child households in high income brackets and high income geographic areas. And so our shows are going to be pointed that way. It's going to be people who live in apartments for the next 30 years.
Yeah. And I grew up in that era, the kind of the TV generation. And as you're talking about that, I'm thinking through and I'm sort of walking back through the shows we watched. And there was definitely a move away from small town, wholesome, communities and kind of life lessons into something like a Three's Company, which was pretty edgy even for the time. But that's quite a shift.
Some of it's kind of natural, right? Like you have all these production companies in New York and LA.
Sure.
It's cheaper to shoot in New York and LA.
Right.
But remember that they had built entire small towns out in California to shoot movies and TV shows in. Like there were back lots that were built out like Middle America because that's where the audience was. Like they already had all this production design and stuff done.
Yeah, Little House on the Prairie shot in Kansas, right? No, that's California. That's the Gold Hills, right?
Yeah.
Golden Country, what do they call it?
It is interesting how this kind of is played out over the years. And you've probably seen more of these shifts. What was when you were watching television and you were mostly seeing people, coastal elites, is that what we call them? But you were seeing like people living in apartment buildings, people living in California suburbs. Was that what your life looked like?
No, not at all. I was raised.
I have a rough idea. This is kind of a setup question.
It is. I was going to roll a funny line and then thought, I don't know if I can get away with that. So no, I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, in the middle of Illinois, right on the Illinois River, across from Peoria, which is dominated by corn and soybeans.
Yeah.
So, I went to a small grade school. Girls were still required to wear dresses and skirts. Boys had to wear long pants. We did the Pledge of Allegiance. There was prayer, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But then consolidation happened in our area, and I ended up going to a very large high school. There were over 4,000 students in my high school. So that's a big high school on anybody's standard. So that was kind of culture shock as well, going from I don't know, there was probably 40 kids in my class in grade school.
Like almost one-room schoolhouse kind of stuff.
Yeah. And there were 1,200 of us as freshmen.
Yeah.
So I think we graduated upper eights. So,
yeah. So that's a change.
It was quite a shift. And, it was at a time. So we started on the Charlie Brown Christmas special, and now we're talking about culture change. That's fun.
Well, I was trying to loop it back, but like, the Charlie Brown Christmas special stays on the air for generations as all these changes are happening around it.
Yeah, because growing up through the 70s, I started high school in 77. And the Cultural Revolution of the 60s had gone mainstream by then.
Yeah. Beatniks were no longer weirdos. They were
my parents.
Yeah.
Yeah. My parents weren't quite beatniks,
wasn't quite where I was going.
But my mom looked a lot like Shirley Partridge. You have to look that reference up. But the interesting thing, the Charlie Brown Christmas special was actually, I don't want to sound corny, but it was a beacon. It was that gospel drum beat in my life that I didn't get anywhere else. We weren't churchgoers as I was growing up. But the clear meaning of Christmas was articulated to me every year through the Charlie Brown Christmas special. So
interesting.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my dad has it does not revolve around Charlie Brown, but it is kind of a similar thing where he grew up in a Midwestern unchurched American family. So there's lots of echoes of Christianity. There's lots of residue of Christianity.
Yes.
The Midwest is just full of stuff built on the foundation of Christianity, but you can miss a lot of that until Christmas comes along and people start singing carols and things in them. And so even though Dad had no love for the Bible or God or Christianity or even other Christians until he was saved, Christmas was a kind of a bright spot. Like it was a very, very interesting thing for him. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Midwest is a little different. You know, here in the South, it is, even still, there's an overt Christian culture here that at least is continuing to do a hat tip and a respectful nod towards Christianity. Where in the Midwest, it was more of a quiet sort of work ethic, moralistic, and I don't mean those in negative, in a negative sense, but it was a much quieter Midwestern feel. It wasn't as overt. It was, we don't really talk about it.
Exactly.
But it's under the surface. We're in the South. It's more freely talked about.
Yeah, I can definitely think of this Midwestern flavor, which is like 2 things you never do in the Midwest. 1, never miss church. 2, never talk about church.
Or politics.
Yeah. So
where
that is fascinating.
Where did your dad grow up?
Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Okay, well, I thought your mom was from Oklahoma as well, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But also spent a lot of time up in Minnesota.
Let's be controversial.
Sure.
Oklahoma is not the Midwest, my friend.
No, it is its own thing.
It is its own thing.
But I have, they spent a lot of time up in Iowa and a lot of time up in Minnesota because that's where the original family roots are kind of tangled up there. So
yeah, I have some family roots in Iowa as well.
Yeah. So it's kind of fascinating to go through some of these different cultural things. So what are the takeaways for young people listening to this podcast? They're too young to know anything about partridges. Any kind of partridges, probably. They're too young to really grasp some of this stuff. But you have kids.
I do.
And you have grandkids, and I have kids.
It's true.
So we're probably theoretically thinking about modern times and stuff that's happening now. Like, what are some of the takeaways? If you watch the Charlie Brown Christmas special, currently streaming on Apple's platforms of choice, apparently, what are the takeaways that people should have?
Oh boy.
What do you think is going to resonate with this younger generation?
There is a ancient hope in the Christmas story that is not available anywhere else. There's no other worldview that can provide this. It's despair outside of Christ.
Yeah.
So, there's really 2 major events in history, and one is creation, right? And the other one is recreation, when Christ come to recreate the cosmos, to set it right, to cure sin. That is the story. And it resonates in every possible direction. There's without Christ, there's only death.
Yeah.
And we even see that in the Charlie Brown Christmas special, if I can keep going back to that.
Yeah.
There's this scene.
It is our central theme. Yeah.
Yeah. There's this sub-story that happens. Charlie Brown goes and buys Christmas tree, and his peers hate it and make fun of him and laugh at it. And it's literally a dead tree, right? It was a real tree. Somebody cut it, and it is dropping needles through all the scenes, right? They put an ornament on it, and it can't even support the weight of an ornament, right? So I mean, this tree is dead. But after Linus reads from Luke chapter 2 and tells Charlie Brown, this is what Christmas is all about. Charlie Brown is inspired, and he goes and grabs the tree, and everybody follows him, right? And his peers see this whole progression, and this tree is resurrected. This tree is glorified. It is more glorious than its created form. And at that point, the children break out into "Hark the Herald Angels Sing," right? Mm-hmm. It's a powerful scene, and most people miss that part. It's just this dumb Christmas tree, right?
Yeah. So I have to ask.
With a hat tip to Boniface, right? Go look up Boniface and why we have Christmas trees.
Yeah. So, well, you're a well-read Presbyterian elder who is well aware of Boniface. So you see this, obviously.
Yeah, 2 out of 3 is not bad.
My question is, how much of this do you think Charles Schulz brought? How much of this do you think the animators were aware of? Like, how deliberate is this, and how much does this just build on Christian tradition that's been kind of soaked into the culture, and you draw yellow lines around stuff to show that it's good and happy? Like,
yeah, I mean that's a great question, because it wasn't until the last couple of years that I spotted the resurrection sequence in the film or in the cartoon, and some of that is just I tend to try to look for that more in stories or even in the scriptures. So it was fascinating. I'm like, oh, there it is. And I mean, we can talk about the cross on the bottom of the tree. There's all kinds of these images that maybe they're intentionally, or it may be, like you said, just sort of the impact of grace on our culture and on the Christian story, that we just intuitively include these elements. I've heard it said there's really only one story, and that is the story that scriptures present. And we just take that story and morph it into different subjects or topics, but it's still the same sequence of events. It would be really interesting to know. Yeah. Since the script was written in a day, it's fascinating question.
Yeah. Well, it's probably the sort
Somebody
of thing.
should ask AI and let us know.
AI might know
how intentional some of those things are.
We're right on the edge, and this is one of the things that I can't put it on my to-do list because there's too much. There's too much other stuff on my to-do list, but there are a bunch of really fascinating things that happened recently enough that some of those folks are still around. And somebody should go and ask some of these questions while the opportunity is still there. So I'm thinking about, there is a Disney animator who lives in Franklin. And he was one of the last guys out of the old Disney when Walt was still alive, before.
When they were hand drawing stuff.
Well, it's not just the technique, but like the dark times. It's kind of fascinating to me how quickly Disney Animation Studios lost their way as soon as Walt was gone. Like, people that had worked with him for decades were like, oh, what do we do now? Black Cauldron? Yeah, it's fairy tales. That's what we do, right? We do fairy tales. Sure, let's do that. And everyone hated it, and it was awful. And then they were doing Billy Joel stuff, and it was just like, how did you guys forget how to do stuff? But he was there for that, and he left and did stuff with Don Bluth, and he's still. So like, there are some guys like that where it's not the most pressing stuff, but I would really hope that we don't lose track of some of these very interesting lessons that happen during cultural shifts. You see major cultural shifts at the turn of the century. You see major cultural shifts, 50s to 60s. Like, it's very fascinating times. So, yeah, I don't know that we're going to drop all the T.REX projects that we have right now to go
research Charlie Brown.
try to get a hold of the animators who worked for that little made-for-TV animation studio up in New York that did all those drawings super hurriedly and ask what they remember. We probably won't do that.
Probably not.
But somebody could.
Somebody could.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the things that are really pressing in this story? the resurrection aspect of it is really important. I thought you were going to go more into the Incarnation.
Okay.
And I thought we were going to go down kind of that track a little bit too.
Yeah, I mean, we could do that. I don't know how hardcore theologically you want to be here. I was thinking something a little lighter just to get people interested in the topic. But
I am tickled that we did a conversation about a cartoon and you brought it to the table, not the animator. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
I do think people should go deeper with theology. We don't need to do it in this particular podcast conversation, but people need to get deeper into the theology of Christmas. Absolutely. And I thought you were going to go into the Incarnation because that is the Christmas, the Christmas story revolving around Christ coming down and taking on flesh, the humility of being born as a baby, all that stuff.
Yeah,
it's fascinating.
To quote Michael Card and steal his line, eternity steps into time.
Yeah.
I mean, my brain blue screens at that point. And the Incarnation is important. It's theologically rich. It's a little hard for mere man to get our heads wrapped around it, but there's some important lessons there that, the earth, our world that we live in, is important because the creator of it, shed or put off, mildly laid aside, as the hymn says, his Godhead and came here as a man.
Yeah.
And it really informs everything that you and I do.
Right.
Or should inform everything that you and I do. So it's an important concept, probably not one we can cover here in the end of a podcast, but maybe we could come back to it.
We'll crack open the can of worms and let people know there's something to look into because Christianity, I was going to say recently, but not really recently, because Gnosticism has fallen into this trap and, Neoplatonism and the ascetics. Like there is a tendency, it's very easy to look at the fallen world and the sinful flesh and say, the spiritual is what matters.
Right.
But God came in physical form.
Yes.
And the glory was manifest physically. And what is going to be redeemed is not just the soul, but there's a physical aspect to it.
That's correct. That's correct.
It's a very important thing for T.REX, what we're doing. We're wanting to protect life, not just souls, but the physical matters. That's why we sell body armor. You can protect the physical part.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So it is a can of worms that should be opened often by Christians because it is really easy, I think, to go into pure spiritualism and become an ascetic or a Gnostic or something like that.
Yep. Or, absolutely.
One of those things, yeah.
Yeah, it's well said. So, maybe we'll come back and we'll do a little more hardcore theology next time.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this was an encouraging Christmas episode for people. I'm glad that I finally had a on-the-record conversation with you that other people can appreciate. As much as I appreciate our conversations, I have somewhere around here.
Here we go.
Your Christmas present.
Oh, all right.
So there you go.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate all the stuff that you have done for us in the last, 4.5 years?
4.5 years.
4.5 years, all the stuff that you brought to the table, the conversations that we've had about some of these issues, you do a lot of work here. That's highly appreciated. But the conversation we've had about some of these issues has meant a lot to me, so I'm glad that we're sharing those with people. Hopefully that is a good Christmas episode. Apparently the homework assignment, we get to give homework assignments here.
That's right.
Go watch the Christmas special, the Charlie Bryan Christmas special, and then think really deeply about the Incarnation and Gnosticism and stuff.
And the resurrection.
And the resurrection.
Yeah.